Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I rise figuratively to propose the motion which stands in my name. And of course, it's almost impossible to follow the eloquence of Lorna there, but I will attempt to do so. We all in this borough want less pollution and congestion, but these ideologically driven and poorly conceived LTNs have failed to do this, and in some areas made them worse. As has been described, 10,000 people have signed a petition against this. 3,000 people marched on the town hall to object. We as local Conservatives have done a survey online and posted through people's doors. We've received over 1,000 responses in 10 days, 93% of which are against the LTNs. This, Mr. Mayor, is the biggest issue I've seen since Labour's previously ill-thought-out plan for a tram down the Uxbridge Road. But before I talk about the LTN specifically, I think there are some myths that I need to bust around this. Firstly, the myth is that the government imposed these. Simply not true. Our neighbouring Hillingdon, for example, has no LTNs or anything that looks like one. The second myth is that consultation wasn't allowed or there wasn't enough time for proper consultation. The letter from the Secretary of State clearly states that he expected consultation. And our own survey, which has garnered such good response in 10 days, proves that the council could have done a proper consultation. The third myth is that we can't do any consultation or any changes until after 6 months have elapsed. Wandsworth, Lewisham and Redbridge have all removed their LTNs, so this can happen now. And finally, and perhaps the worst myth of all, is about the type of people who are objecting to LTNs. Councillor Conlon, in a quote in a tweet, described us as entitled public school types. That's not who's been contacting me. It's teachers, it's nurses, it's disabled people, it's cyclists and walkers, it's young families who are trying to get their children to school or to after-school clubs. And the problems with these LTNs were obvious from the start, as Lorna has described. Gridlock on our main roads, including for buses. Increased pollution in those areas. Horn Lane, one of the most polluted parts of our borough, is now more polluted because cars are being forced onto it. And we've seen extra pollution outside our primary schools, like St Mark's or Little Ealing and the Mount Carmel. But there were less obvious problems that have appeared as well. I mean, who would have thought that the emergency services wouldn't have been able to get through? But we've seen that fire brigade drill struggling to get that post out of the ground. And as has been described, the fact that there was no consultation with the London Ambulance Service, which meant that lives could have been put at risk by this council, is an absolute disgrace. But there are also issues with parking. People not being able to park in their roads anymore because everyone's having to park on one side of the barrier. And women who emailed me who say they're now fearful for their safety at night because the roads are so empty. Like all of Ealing Labour's anti-car policies, these hit the poorest and the most vulnerable and those most struggling with COVID. Those who need to drive to work, those who live on main roads, those local small business owners, those tradesmen who need to travel between areas to do their work, and those young families who need to take their children to school or to after-school clubs. The council says, don't worry, we're going to consult. But a proper consultation needs to be based on evidence. There's very little data on traffic flow and pollution before the introduction of these LTNs. And those that there are seems to suggest that in those areas, pollution and congestion weren't a significant problem. And second of all, and perhaps most importantly, a consultation needs to be unbiased and to be seen to be unbiased. And this is where residents have significant concerns. The leader has already said in that notorious video that he wants to take advantage of COVID and to make the LTNs permanent. He refused to acknowledge the 10,000 signatories on the Change.org petition, but then promoted the pro-LTN change. Mr. Mayor, I think he has to wait till after I finish before he interrupts me. He promoted the pro-LTN Change.org petition.
30 seconds.
He and his councillors refused to respond to residents and refused to stand up for those residents in places like Fisher's Lane and Turnham Green Terrace, which have been imposed by Hounslow, but then will bend over backwards for his mates in Hounslow when they demand a meeting about Swinken Avenue. And of course, the online consultation platform is one where the head of sales and marketing is Labour councillor Peter Mason. How and why would any residents have confidence that this consultation will be fair? Mr. Mayor, in conclusion, we don't need to wait 6 months. We already know that most have been an abject failure. It's time to rip them up and do a proper consultation. This is about consulting with residents and listening to them. Whatever your views on LTNs, as elected representatives, we must ensure that we consult properly and we act swiftly to correct our mistakes. This council has failed to do either. Now this council needs to get a grip and do so by voting in favour of this motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor.